Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
So Michael Cohen has made many statements to the House, as I understand it, and the Senate. He put out a statement talking about a project which was essentially, I guess, more or less of an option that we were looking at in Moscow. Everybody knew about it. It was written about in newspapers. It was a well-known project. It was during the early part of 16, and I guess even before that. It lasted a short period of time. I didn't do the project. I decided not to do the project, so I didn't do it. So we're not talking about doing a project. We're talking about not doing a project. Michael Cohen, what he's doing is he was convicted, I guess. You'll have to put it into legal terms. But he was convicted with a fairly long-term sentence on things totally unrelated to the Trump organization, having to do with mortgages and having to do with cheating the IRS, perhaps, a lot of different things. I don't know exactly, but he was convicted of various things unrelated to us. He was given a fairly long jail sentence, and he's a weak person. And by being weak, unlike other people that you watch, he's a weak person, and what he's trying to do is get a reduced sentence. So he's lying about a project that everybody knew about. I mean, we were very open with it. We were thinking about building a building. I guess we had in a form, it was an option. I don't know what you'd call it. I decided ultimately not to do it. There would have been nothing wrong if I did do it. If I did do it, there would have been nothing wrong. That was my business. So he's lying very simply to get a reduced sentence, okay?
Oh, my God. All right. So Mueller is just what? Taking Michael Cohen's word as if, he doesn't have, real evidence that, first of all, Michael Cohen did go to Prague and that he paid the hackers in Prague and that he entered Czechoslovakia through Germany and that this Trump Tower deal was still alive in 2017 and that Michael Cohen lied under oath to the... I mean, this is just so amazing. Donald, he's weak. People who cooperate with law enforcement in this law and order administration are weak and they're liars, and people who don't, like he said, he goes, and you see these other people who aren't weak, like Manafort who lies, and the other, it's just so amazing to me. He actually prefers people who don't tell the truth to law enforcement, who lie to Congress, over people who cooperate with law enforcement. It's such a sick presidency. I in my whole life, no matter what you think about, the Russia thing, that the president of the United States stood there today and said that a person who tells the truth under penalty of perjury and jail and all these is weak. And that people who resist law enforcement, people who don't, like Paul Manafort, who say that they're with the government only to, steal the information from the government and return it to Donald Trump, they're the good guys. What kind of a president is that?
Shouldn't they know that now that Manafort is on Team USA, you can't be talking back and forth like this?
Well, absolutely, they should know that. And these lawyers better themselves hire some lawyers because they could be in deep trouble. First of all, you've got the obstruction of justice that's going on when the president dangles a pardon in return, presumably, for Manafort changing his testimony or changing his level of cooperation with Robert Mueller. That is obstruction of justice. The president has the power to grant a pardon at his own discretion, but he can't take a bribe to grant a pardon, and he cannot grant a pardon to a material witness in a criminal investigation in exchange for that witness changing his testimony or not cooperating cooperating with the prosecutors. That is obstruction of justice. Furthermore, the lawyers were finding out information about the Mueller investigation, and Manafort's lawyers were doing that while pretending to cooperate with Robert Mueller and then conveying that information to Donald Trump's lawyers. That, again, is obstruction of justice. That is deceitful, and the lawyers themselves are going to be very, very hot water, and none of those communications are subject to the attorney-client privilege. They could be, Robert Mueller could get that information through the crime fraud exception to the privilege. There's no privilege for communications between an attorney and a client for purpose of committing a crime or fraud. And second, there's obviously no joint privilege once Manafort had agreed to cooperate with the government.
You see what I mean? And the president prefers Manafort and values Manafort as being strong. And Michael Cohen is weak because Michael Cohen came clean. This is a sick man. This is a dangerous man. Now, let's go through the contacts. I told you at the beginning of the show, there are 92 of them. This is a running total that, you can read this too. It's called the Moscow Project. It is a running calendar, a running timeline. You could look at things, a million different ways. On the Moscow Project. They have all kinds of timelines. The one that I find most valuable today is the timeline of contacts between the Trump campaign, the Trump transition team, Manafort, Cohen, Stone, WikiLeaks, and Jr. Because once you read this and once you actually hear it all in a row like this, it becomes very obvious what the story is and how this all unfolded, all right? So let's start at November of 2015, because that is when contact between Michael Cohen and a Russian began, okay? In November of 2015, Michael Cohen, who was then Donald Trump's fixer, spoke with a Russian athlete named Dmitry Kolkov. He was an Olympic weightlifter. He was trying to get the Trump Tower Moscow project development deal rolling in Moscow. So Ivanka Trump knew this wrestler and told Michael Cohen, try to call him. He's got connections to Putin. So Michael Cohen reaches out to this wrestler, and Kolkov emails Cohen back and said, quote, I could arrange a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin to help pave the way for the tower. This was the beginning of the Trump Tower reach out by the Trump campaign, because in 2015 it was a campaign. Now, this wrestler denied initially that he was emailing Cohen, but Mueller has these emails. Cohen emails this wrestler, Kolkov, and he refuses his offer and says the Trump organization already has an agreement in place. Congressional investigators and Robert Mueller have these emails. The wrestler denied that he was emailing Cohen even then. Kolkov then emails Cohen back, copying Ivanka Trump. Uh-oh. And he says, I'm questioning Cohen's authority to make decisions for the Trump organization. In January of 2016, Michael Cohen emails Vladimir Putin's top person, Dmitry Peskov, the secretary to Vladimir Putin, okay, which is like chief of staff, or Sarah Sanders, really, at the Kremlin, and he asks for assistance because the Trump Tower project seems to be stalled and he wants to build it in Moscow. And the Kremlin had confirmed that it received the email. Initially, the Kremlin said it did not reply to Michael Cohen, but that is not true either. January 16, 2 days later, Cohen emails Peskov's office again and says, I'm trying to reach another high-level Russian official. I'm asking for someone who speaks English to contact me. Now, all this stuff that I'm telling you off this timeline, this is in the court filing today, that these things did happen. January 20th, 2016, Cohen gets an email from Peskov's assistant, stating that she's been trying to reach Michael Cohen and he should call her. And she gives him a Moscow phone number. Later that day, he calls this woman, Dmitry Peskov's assistant, and he speaks to her around 20 minutes. He describes that he is Donald Trump's personal attorney. He describes the proposed Trump Tower Moscow project, and he requests assistance in moving the project forward, both in securing land to build the tower and financing the construction. That's in January, the end of January. 6 weeks later, Paul Manafort visits Julian Assange in London in the Ecuadorian embassy. Manafort, according to the Guardian article we got this week, has been there repeatedly. He's been going to that embassy to see Julian Assange since 2013, and I suspect it was to further Viktor Yanukovych's jailing of Yulia Tymoshenko, okay, who was running against Viktor Yanukovych. And, of course, Paul Manafort was the campaign manager for the Russian-connected Viktor Yanukovych. The exact date of the visit is unclear, and while Manafort did not officially join the Trump campaign until 28 days later, he had been actively seeking to join the campaign for a number of weeks. He initially contacted the Trump campaign on February 29th of 2016. He reached out to Donald Trump with a slick, carefully calibrated offer that appealed to Donald Trump's need for professional guidance, his thirst for political payback. And the report that The Guardian put out, they're standing by it, even though, you know, Manafort's all sue them and all that. Yeah, they're still to this minute standing by their story. Okay, so Manafort is the first person that goes to see Julian Assange. He goes there. March 14th, George Papadopoulos, the Trump campaign foreign policy advisor, he meets with this guy, Joseph Misfud, in Italy. Misfud says he's got high-level contacts within the Kremlin. He denies these allegations. But on March 24th, 10 days later, Papadopoulos meets with Misfud and a female Russian national who he believed was one of Putin's relatives. 2 weeks later, Papadopoulos emails this female Russian national, and he says, I'm a Trump advisor. The next day, Paul Manafort corresponds with a man named Konstantin Kilimnik, who is a Russian-Ukrainian political operative. He's a former member of Russian intelligence. And Paul Manafort wants to know from Konstantin Kilimnik if Oleg Deripaska, Putin's aluminum oligarch, has seen news coverage of Manafort's joining the Trump campaign. That same day, Kilimnik replies to Manafort's email saying, absolutely. That same day, Manafort emails him again and says, how do I use this to get whole with Deripaska? Remember, Deripaska has given Paul Manafort millions of dollars to do a media campaign that Russia wants done, and Manafort's never done it, and they're suing him. So he's now asking the Kremlin, or an associate of the Kremlin, ask Oleg Deripaska, how do I use this news coverage that you see that I am inside the Trump campaign to make me and Oleg even, to settle the score so he'll stop suing me for this money back. That same day, the female Russian national emails George Papadopoulos saying, I would be very pleased to support his initiatives between their two countries, talking about Trump and Putin. That same day, the professor in Italy replies to George Papadopoulos saying, this has already been agreed to. I'm guessing through Michael Cohen. That same day, the female Russian national replies to George Papadopoulos, confirming it. She said, we're very excited by the possibility of a good relationship with Mr. Trump. The Russian Federation would love to welcome him once his candidature would be officially announced. April 18th, this is a week later, this professor in Italy, who is really a Russian intelligence guy, introduces George Papadopoulos to an individual who has connections to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is exactly where Putin is running this operation out of. Same day, April 18th, at some point, Papadopoulos calls this man at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His name is Ivan Timofeyev, and they have a Skype call. 4 days later, they exchange emails. That same day, Papadopoulos and the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs guy Ivan exchange emails. They exchange 2 contacts. Now, between April 22nd and May 4th, after the email exchange, at some point, Papadopoulos and the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, this Ivan guy, had an additional Skype call. And then they set up conversations over Skype, and they say they're going to have future Skype calls. 4 days later, this Italian professor, Misfud, tells George Papadopoulos that Russians have dirt on Hillary Clinton. The next day, Jeff Sessions and Jared Kushner meet with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, at the Mayflower Hotel. This is right before Trump's first foreign policy speech, where he names Papadopoulos and Carter Page, Ph.D., and as being his foreign affairs team. 2 days later, Papadopoulos reaches out to this female Russian national about a potential trip to Russia. Next day, Papadopoulos contacts this professor to thank him for his critical help in arranging the meeting between the campaign and the Russian government. That's the last day in April. First day in May, Manafort meets with Konstantin Kilimnik. 4 days later, this Ivan guy at the Foreign Ministry of Affairs emails George Papadopoulos. He said he talked to his colleagues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they are open for cooperation. Next day, May 5th, Michael Cohen gets an invitation from Peskov to come to Russia. That invitation goes through Felix Sater to Michael Cohen, and Sater then writes to Michael Cohen that Peskov, who is the Sarah Sanders to Vladimir Putin, quote, would like to invite you as his guest to the St. Petersburg Forum, which is Russia's Davos, June 16th to 19th. He wants to meet there with you and possibly introduce you to either the president of Russia or the prime minister of Russia. So that would be Putin or Medvedev, as they are not sure if one, and one is Trump, if one or both will be there. He said, anything you want to discuss, including dates and subjects, are on the table to discuss. 3 days later, this Ivan guy emails Papadopoulos about putting him in touch with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs head of the U.S. desk. And then a week later, this Ivan guy sets up another Skype call with Papadopoulos, and discusses the fact that Foreign Contact 2 reported a good reaction from the U.S. desk at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. May 13th, this Italian professor Misfud emails Papadopoulos saying, we will continue to liaise through you with the Russian counterparts in terms of what is needed for a high-level meeting of Mr. Trump with the Russian Federation. 1 week later, Trump Jr. is having dinner with the central banker of Russia, Alexander Torshin. They do this at the NRA convention. Late in May, also, this is May 21st when they meet, Junior and Torshin, when they meet at the NRA. At the same time, Michael Caputo, a Trump campaign official, speaks with a Russian national named Henry Greenberg over the phone. Greenberg claims that he's got information for the Trump campaign. And after this conversation, Michael Caputo puts this Henry Greenberg dude in contact with Roger Stone. Roger Stone meets with Henry Greenberg in Sunny Isles, Florida. Greenberg says he will sell the dirt for $2 million. And Roger Stone rejects the offer, knowing he can get it for free. In the summer of 2016, Rick Gates, Manafort's partner, remains in email contact with Kilimnik throughout the fall and the summer. June 6th and 7th. Trump says, my phone records show 3 very short phone calls between Emin and me between June 6th and June 7th. I do not recall speaking to Emin. It's possible we left each other voicemail messages. I simply do not remember. June 6th and 7th, Trump Jr. and Emin Agararlov speak for a second time. And Trump Jr. and Agararlov speak for a third time later in that day, June 6th and 7th. On June 9th, there is a meeting at Trump Tower. It includes Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, Rob Goldstone, Jared Kushner, Natalia Veselnitskaya, a former State Department contractor who was a translator, Russian-American lobbyist and former Soviet counterintelligence officer named Rinat Akhmedchin, and Irakli Kavalyadze, who is a real estate and finance executive in Georgia, which has now been invaded by Russia. Before the meeting, Trump Jr. is told he would be given the dirt on Hillary Clinton, to which Jr. replies, if it's what you say it is, I love it. Jr. then tells everybody nothing came of it, but 10 days later, George Papadopoulos gets several emails and has several Skype exchanges with the guy from the Russian Foreign Ministry, Ivan. And during one of these exchanges, Ivan reportedly suggests somebody from the campaign needs to come to Russia. That same day, Papadopoulos continues to have email and Skype exchanges saying that, he'll get back to him about somebody coming to Russia. On the 7th of July, Paul Manafort emails Konstantin Kilimnik about offering private briefings about what's going on inside the campaign to Oleg Deripaska, who is now saying, you owe me $19 million. That same day, Carter Page travels to Moscow, supposedly to give a speech. While he's there, he meets with the head of investor relations at Rosneft. That same day, Page is in Moscow. He speaks to the prime minister. A week later, Papadopoulos emails Ivan and he says, I need to set up a meeting between Trump team officials and Russian officials. 4 days later, Jeff Sessions keynotes a lunch in Cleveland, co-hosted by the Heritage Foundation and the U.S. Department of State, and he meets with Kislyak. That same day, Carter Page and J.D. Gordon, the director of national security for the Trump campaign, also meets with Kislyak at the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. A week later, Kilimnik emails Manafort, and they agree to meet again. August 14th, Roger Stone sent a DM, a direct message, over Twitter to Guccifer 2.0, saying, delighted you are reinstated. Guccifer 2.0 sends an email to Roger Stone, because Roger Stone was left out of the campaign, then he was brought back in, right? So all of a sudden, he gets a tweet from this Russian intelligence hacking group, Guccifer 2.0, saying, delighted you are reinstated. Next day, Guccifer 2.0 replies to Stone, thanking him for writing. August 15th, same day, Stone replies to Guccifer 2.0, asking to retweet a link. August 17th, Guccifer 2.0 sends Stone numerous direct messages over Twitter praising him and offering assistance. September, Rick Gates is in contact with an unnamed individual who the FBI assessed had ongoing ties to Russian intelligence. September 8th, Jeff Sessions meets again with Kislyak, this time in his Senate office privately. He doesn't disclose this meeting until March 2nd of 2017. September 9th, Guccifer 2.0 sends a direct message to Roger Stone. It has a link to the hacked voter turnout data from the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Guccifer 2.0 provided this hacked information to a Republican political operative who posted it on his blog. September 9th, Stone replies to Guccifer 2.0 saying the information was pretty standard. A week later, WikiLeaks contacts Trump Jr. via Twitter. And WikiLeaks gives Jr. the login credentials for what WikiLeaks describes as, quote, a PAC-run anti-Trump site. September 21st, the next morning, Trump Jr. replies, thanking WikiLeaks. September 29th, Maria Butina, the Russian agent, and J.D. Gordon meet at a party at a Swiss ambassador's house. September to October, J.D. Gordon emails Butina and Paul Erickson, Republican operative, with a clip of a recent appearance he had made in RT. He says, Maria Butina is a special assistant to the deputy governor of the Bank of Russia. September to October, Butina responds to J.D. Gordon's email inviting him to a dinner hosted by conservative writer and Rockefeller heir George O'Neill Jr. The Washington Post says prosecutors cited the dinner organized by O'Neill, described in court documents as person 2. September to October, J.D. Gordon responds to Butina's email declining the dinner invitation but inviting her for drinks and a concert. In his correspondence with Butina, he reportedly included a link to a September 2016 Politico story reporting that he was part of Trump's growing transition team. October 2016, Rick Gates has another contact with an unnamed individual at ongoing ties to Russian intelligence. October 3rd, WikiLeaks contacts Jr. again over Twitter, and they ask him to comment on / push a story about Hillary Clinton. October 3rd, Jr. replies to the message saying, already did. He then asks WikiLeaks about a leak that had been foreshadowed by a tweet by Roger Stone. October 12th, WikiLeaks contacts Jr. again, and they ask him to ask his father to tweet these WikiLeaks links, which he did. WikiLeaks contacts Trump Jr. several other times. At this point, Trump Jr. stops responding to the messages. WikiLeaks suggested to Jr. that if Trump were to lose the election, Trump should not concede. He should challenge the media and rigging of the election that occurred. These contacts between WikiLeaks and Jr. continued through the election and into the summer of 2017. October 13th, 2016, after WikiLeaks released a statement claiming they had not communicated with Stone, Stone sent WikiLeaks a direct message about his defense of Julian Assange. October 13th, WikiLeaks replies to Roger Stone telling him, don't claim an association with WikiLeaks. 2 days later, Stone sends a DM, a direct message to WikiLeaks saying you should figure out who your friends are. Late October, J.D. Gordon invites Maria Butina to his birthday party. The two had no additional contact after that birthday party. November 9th, WikiLeaks sends a direct message to Roger Stone after the election saying that they were more free to communicate now. Next day, Emin Agararlov texts Trump Jr. congratulating him on his father on the win and said, always at your disposal here in Russia, Emin and Aras Agararlov. Now we're into the transition. Kushner meets with Kislyak at Trump Tower. They discuss the possibility of setting up a secret and secure back channel between the transition team and the Kremlin. Michael Flynn is also at that meeting. During that meeting, it was suggested that Trump use Russian diplomatic facilities. Remember that? Use the New York embassy, the Russian New York embassy, to open up a back channel to facilitate a back door. So Kislyak then arranges for Kushner to meet with Sergei Gorkov, the president of the Russian bank VEB. Kushner meets with Gorkov. He describes the meeting as an official meeting where he was representing the transition team, but the meeting was really to establish a back channel to Putin. The bank claimed that Kushner met with Gorkov in his capacity as the head of his family's real estate company. Emin Agararlov on the 13th of December texts Jr. He says, can I pose a quick question? December 22nd, Flynn contacts Kislyak about a pending vote on a U.S. resolution on the issue of Israeli settlements and asks that Russia vote against it. Christmas Day, Flynn texts Kislyak to wish him a Merry Christmas and to express condolences for a plane crash. The 29th of December, Flynn calls Kislyak. The 29th of December, Flynn calls Kislyak a second time. The 29th of December, Flynn calls Kislyak a third time. The 29th of December, Flynn calls Kislyak a fourth time. The 29th of December, Flynn calls Kislyak a fifth time. This is when the Russian embassy was told about U.S. sanctions and the announcement by Russian President Vladimir Putin that he had decided against reprisals for the sanctions. Trump tweets out, "I always knew he was smart." December 31st, Kislyak finally calls Flynn to inform him that Russia did not retaliate against the most recent round of U.S. sanctions at the Trump team's request. January 9th, Cohen meets with Russian billionaire Viktor Vekselberg in Trump Tower to discuss a mutual desire to strengthen Russia's relations with the United States under President Trump. On the 11th of January, Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater, the brother of Betsy DeVos, our education secretary, meets with Kirill Dmitriev, the head of the sanctioned Russian Direct Investment Fund. Eric Prince presented himself as an unofficial envoy for Donald Trump to high-ranking officials from the United Arab Emirates. This meeting was brokered by George Nader. Eric Prince says he just happened to run into these people at a bar in the Seychelles Islands. It was unplanned. I was not acting as an official emissary of the Trump transition team. But Lebanese American businessman George Nader, who's been in trouble with the law before for pedophilia, by the way, said, no, I arranged this meeting as an attempt to establish a back channel between the Kremlin and the incoming Trump administration. January 17th to the 20th, Anthony Scaramucci meets with Dmitriev at the Davos World Economic Forum. After that, Scaramucci criticizes the sanctions on Russia on Russian TV. And then he's hired to serve on the executive committee for Trump's transition team. Then he's briefly hired subsequently as the White House communications director. It lasts 10 days. These are the 92 contacts between the Trump campaign officials, Michael Cohen, Roger Stone, Donald Trump Jr., Jeff Sessions, Paul Manafort, J.D. Gordon, Jared Kushner, Carter Page, Michael Flynn, Eric Prince, George Papadopoulos, who is a lot more interesting than this 2-week prison sentence would indicate, Anthony Scaramucci, and Rick Gates. The other campaign officials are all aware of these contacts. Corey Lewandowski, K.T. McFarland, Tom Bossert, Hope Hicks, Reince Priebus, Sam Clovis, Steve Bannon, Steve Miller, Sean Spicer, John Mashburn, Ivanka Trump, David Bossie, and Brad Parscale. What's really interesting is the direct communications between WikiLeaks, Roger Stone, and Jr., because now Roger Stone is all over the world, all over TV, all over everywhere, denying that he had any contact with WikiLeaks and that it was all intermediaries. And he has switched his story. The intermediary was Jerome Corsi. The intermediary was Randy Credico. The intermediary was this one. It was that one. I never did. And, and Corsi's story, does it hold water? No, it doesn't hold water. He says he watched Julian Assange on TV say that he, had the hacked documents and was going to, and he deduced. He's so smart, this conspiracy theorist who dreamt up 9/11 was an inside job and Obama was born in Kenya. He said he figured out that WikiLeaks had Podesta's emails and that they were going to release them on the day that the Access he just knew. Well, no one knew there was an Access Hollywood tape. All right, so, and he's lying. But Roger Stone had direct contact with WikiLeaks. Files were sent. I could tell you the URL for those files because they're in the indictment of the 12 Russians that Mueller indicted. And also in the indictment, it says, August 15, 2016, the conspirators posing as Guccifer 2.0 wrote to a person who was in regular contact with senior members of the presidential campaign of Donald Trump. Thank you for writing back. Do you find anything interesting in the docs I posted? The conspirators added, please tell me if I can help you anyhow. It would be a great pleasure to me. Well, we now know that email, that direct message was between Russian intelligence, Guccifer 2.0, and Roger Stone. And how do we know that? Because the person responded after Guccifer gave them the voter information, pretty standard. That's in the indictment, and it's also something Roger Stone is copped to. Then you got Junior talking to WikiLeaks. I mean, this whole thing is proved. Go to RandiRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.